Hi.
Hi.
Welcome to...
Are you already recording?
Yeah, I'm recording.
Sorry. Okay.
Hi, welcome to a documentary podcast. I'm Josh.
And I'm Catherine.
And we come up with very complicated, meaningful names for things.
Exactly.
That are really vague, and you have no idea what this podcast is about. I'm assuming, judging by the name, so...
But we definitely like vague things as well.
Yeah. Hey, I was curious, how much do you think people think that this is like a true crime podcast? Where we're making like a documentary series about some murder or something?
Well, potentially, but I think we need to add in some sort of like murder name to the title.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So
maybe that's how we should market it, because then that will definitely get more viewers.
Yeah, right? So on today's podcast, we talk about this unsolved case that will still be unsolved when we're done.
Yep.
So how are you doing? How's the snow over there?
It's pretty insane. Like, it looks like, I don't know if anyone's watching the video podcast version of this, if you can see out my window, it's like a legit snow globe right now. So I never believed the weather predictions when they were saying it's going to be this like cyclone bomb. I think that's the term. But I'm definitely believing it now. So
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think since the last time we recorded an episode, I live in Omaha, Nebraska now. And Catherine still lives in Colorado.
Still in Denver.
Yep. So the weather's totally different. It's just rainy here. So
I'm a bit envious of that right now. This is pretty crazy out.
Cool. So on today's episode, we have our first interview with Keegan Kuhn he was co-director on Cowspiracy and What the Health, which were both Netflix films. And he has a new film out that he directed himself called Running for Good, which is a documentary. This one's totally different because it's a documentary about one person. And she's an ultra runner who also runs an animal sanctuary. And yeah, it kind of just follows her as it kind of goes into her past while it goes back and forth between her doing this race across the Sahara Desert. And yeah, it's a really beautiful film. And so I'm excited to have Keegan on today. And Catherine hasn't heard this yet.
No, not yet.
So this will be your first time hearing the interview as well. So, but before
I'm really looking forward to listening to it.
Yeah. So what have you been watching?
So my favorite film I saw in Sundance was called The Disappearance of My Mother, and it's by Benjamino Baresi. It's an Italian film, and super touching, beautifully shot, and it's about a son who decides to film his aging mother who used to be a supermodel in the 60s and 70s, but she actually detests the camera, so it's sort of this conflict between the two of them because he sees the world through the camera and through frames, whereas she thinks truth can never be captured on film, just because of her experiences in the modeling industry and how, I guess, traumatic that was for her. So it's sort of this like relationship story, but like so beautifully shot, incredibly subtle, just about their relationship and accepting one another.
What was that called again? I kind of spaced.
It's called The Disappearance of My Mother, and
Okay.
I would actually love to do a future episode on it, depending on how it gets bought and it's streaming, because it's also one of the best edited, I think, documentaries I've seen in a while. It's very lyrical and almost has this like music flow to it in a way. Yeah.
Nice.
And for people who love film, it talks a lot about just sort of our relationship with the camera and is it truthful or not.
Nice. Yeah, I had a couple that I rewatched recently, and they're actually kind of related to Keegan's films because they operate in kind of the same space. So one of them, I'm going to shout out two right now because one of them I didn't love, and the other one I think is a great film. So the first one is Eating Animals. It's on Hulu streaming right now.
Is that the one that Natalie Portman produced?
Yeah, so Natalie Portman produced it. It was based on the book by Jonathan Safran Foer. And actually the book and I have, people will find out in this film, and actually they, or in this episode, but on the last one I talked about it a little bit anyway with, talking about when lambs become lions, but I've been vegan for a long time, and Eating Animals is one of the seminal books for me. It came out about a decade ago, around the same time I was, right after I went vegetarian, basically. And the book is incredible in my opinion, but the book is like very personal, and it's from Jonathan Safran Foer's like personal experience, and it's a lot about his exploration into the issue and how it relates to him being a new father and raising his kid and deciding if, he should raise his kid vegetarian or not. So he decides to go out and find out more about the meat industry, and it's a beautiful book that is really in depth and like covers a lot of issues, and it's powerful. And then the film is just kind of your standard, Oh,
that's a shame.
Yeah, it's kind of just your standard like the food industry is bad, and it doesn't feel personal. It doesn't have any of that.
Is it sort of like Fooding 2.0?
Basically, which is fine. It was like competently made, beautiful cinematography, well shot interviews. Everything was lit perfectly. There were some like interesting moments, but yeah, for the most part, it was kind of your standard, Food Inc. type movie. And another one just started streaming on Amazon Prime.
Oh.
And it's called If a Tree Falls. And it covers this environmental activist named Daniel McGowan.
Yeah, just to quickly interrupt, it's not a new one, correct?
No, this is an older film.
I've seen this one. It's incredible.
Yeah, it's so beautifully done. This activist, it's just kind of about that drive for activists and why they would do something like burn down why they would like monkey wrench or like burn down a mill where they like it's like a mill where they cut down trees and they make lumber and all that stuff.
Tree mill.
So he was like young and part of the ELF, and it's just kind of about that like juxtaposition between following the tree farmers who were affected, following the cops who investigated the case, and then following the activist who is possibly facing terrorism charges for this. And the interesting thing about it is like it feels very personal. You're kind of like getting that anxiety of what it's like to be caught, essentially, and maybe regretting your decisions a little bit for going too far, but also...
I was about to say, it really plays with the line of where to cross and when, and ethics doesn't justify everything.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then you kind of get an understanding, though, when you're so frustrated because the environment is being like torn apart, and these people, feel a deep sense of frustration that, and I can relate with that, where we're not being heard, and we just keep like destroying the earth. More science is coming out about climate change, and it seems like nothing is done.
Yeah. And it's one of these things that's,
you understand the frustration and the want to just like burn the world down a little bit.
Especially because it's like we're already in essence we've destroyed the world. And so it's like, I guess if someone else is doing it, what's wrong with doing it yourself?
So what else have you been watching?
So the other one I want to talk about, it actually kind of relates to how we started this podcast. It's one of those kind of falls into the category of like a making of a murderer, serial. This is sort of my guilty pleasure is some of these crime dramas.
Hey, no,
exactly.
I love true crime. I was not criticizing.
If you haven't seen this, then you need to watch it. It's called Abducted in Plain Sight.
I did see it.
It's by Skye Borgman. Came out like 2 years ago on Netflix. It's recommended to me from a friend who we share a love of crime dramas or all those things. I'll I'll say this to start off with, it's not the bestly crafted piece of work.
No.
Definitely follows the classic talking heads, lots of archival footage, is a bit slow to start, but I'd say the story is just what propels it. It is insane. Like, the amount of twists, and when you think something's crazy, it gets crazier. Like, it's insane. So basically, it's about a family in Pocatello, Idaho, kind of a remote-ish area, and their daughter gets abducted with them knowing by a family friend. And it's literally as crazy as it sounds.
Yeah.
So, and he just...
There are some moments in that movie that you're just like,
What
what
is this real? And that's, I think, it proves like why I love documentaries so much, because if someone had made a fictional version of this, I'd be like, no way, this is silly. I'd turn it off like 10 minutes in. But the fact that it's all true, and hearing these families' testimonies about how easy it is, though, for another human to manipulate another person, it's just, it's absurd. Like, yeah.
It's wild. Yeah, it's definitely one of those things where if it was like a narrative film, I'd have been like, this is silly.
This is stupid. Yeah,
I really
who
want to
thought
spoil one moment for people, but I'm not going to. Mostly the parents, just like how they were so frustrated.
Yeah, they were.
Because their poor daughter is suffering because these people are so gullible.
Yeah. I'm curious, because it's too bad that we didn't get to hear from him, but like, is it more that he is insanely manipulative? He's obviously a sociopath, but like, is it his intelligence, or is it the family's stupidity? Like, what's the what's the level or the spectrum of it? Because I
think there's something there as far as like the innocence of the time, I guess.
Because it takes place in the 70s.
And then I think a lot of it is like, if you kind of have to give them a little bit of, especially like the dad, you kind of have to forgive them a little bit for being in a time that was like so repressed.
Yes. And they were quite a religious family, and Pocatello is known as a very Mormon area. So I don't remember correctly. Were they Mormon or just religious?
I don't remember, actually.
Yeah. But they believe in aliens, I'll just say that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was wild. It was just unexpected. That's all.
Yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
Once it starts, there's twists every literally couple minutes. And so it's one of those, it's a good like Tuesday night, you want something interesting, but nothing that's going to like, you need to invest yourself into.
Yeah. It's a good movie.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. So with that, I think we will get to our interview. How do you feel about that?
Yes. I'm really looking forward to hearing it. So...
Right, so I'll just go ahead and start recording. Cool, so let's just start off with you introducing yourself.
My name's Keegan Kuhn. I'm the co-director of the documentary films Cowspiracy, What the Health, and most recently the director of the feature-length sports documentary Running for Good.
Cool, I just kind of want to get into a little bit of your history with filmmaking and how you got into it and what drew you to documentaries in general.
Yeah, I started shooting as a lot of skate punk kids, skate videos as a teenager, and really loved the cinematography aspect of shooting skate videos and wanting to make things a little bit more artistic. And being an activist, I tried to take those skills and apply them to activist filmmaking, marginally successfully. But what I started doing was I was doing short little videos for nonprofits that I liked and that I agreed with and wanted to support. And that went from being short promo pieces to little mini docs to short films, and then very quickly into feature lengths. And that was over the course of actually less than 2 years. I went from starting shooting to shooting feature lengths.
Nice. So you kind of went like the Spike Jonze route.
Yeah, it was so funny. Yeah, I mean, I've never done any narrative work, but documentaries, I feel like the real world is so interesting that there's so many untold stories that really need attention. That's been where my focus is at.
Absolutely. I was just having this conversation with someone last night where we were talking about how sometimes in documentaries, like things can happen that if you put in a narrative film would just seem absolutely ridiculous. And that's like my favorite thing about documentaries. And
Totally.
that kind of puts me on the a little bit on the topic of your new film, because Fiona Oakes is just like, seems like such a, I mean, I don't even know how to describe it. Just like an otherworldly person.
She is kind of from her own world, and definitely like if Fiona is a 4-time world record vegan marathon runner. She's the fastest woman in the world to run a marathon on every continent and the North Pole. But when she was 16 years old, she was told she wouldn't ever walk properly and would definitely never run after undergoing 17 plus radical knee surgeries, which ended up having her right kneecap removed. And yet she's gone on to do all these things. So yeah, you write that into a movie, like, oh, okay, you kind of roll your eyes about it, because it's like, oh, what a, kind of corny, inspiring story, right? If that was a narrative. But as a documentary, it's phenomenal because it's the truth. And Fiona runs for this whole purpose of raising awareness and funds for animals. And she has a sanctuary where she takes care of 450 animals every single day. And so she just desperately wants to raise awareness and have a platform to speak, and she's just running to do that.
Absolutely. How did, so we should talk about, the new film is Running for Good. It is a documentary about this ultra marathon runner who is a vegan, raises money for animal sanctuaries and all that stuff, as you just said. I'm kind of curious to how this film came about. How did this story come to you? And to me, it seems like a little bit of a departure. Not completely, because, a lot of your films have covered like vegan issues, animal rights issues, and stuff like that. And this one's no different. But the style of film is coming from more of a, I guess, like a single person focus. And I'm just curious, like, was that a conscious decision of something you wanted to do, or did this story just kind of like come to you?
Yeah, it was definitely conscious. When my co-director Kip Anderson and I were doing a crowdfunding campaign for our first film together, Cowspiracy, Fiona reached out and actually said, "Hey, this film looks amazing. Please let me know what I can do to support you." And I was cursorily aware of Fiona through the Vegan Society, and I looked up who she was and what she had done. I thought, no, if there's anything I can do to support you, this woman does so much. And I love sports documentaries. I'm not like a sports-minded person. I don't play sports. Like, I'm a skateboarder and BMX and anything that's non-team related. But I'll watch a sports documentary about anything: boxer, race car driver, soccer player, doesn't matter. Just because sports films have like all the good elements, or they have the potential to have all the good elements of a great story, right? You have human interest, and you have like overcoming adversity, and then the question of whether the character is going to succeed. But watching a lot of sports documentaries, I was really kind of disappointed that so many of these people who dedicate so much of their lives and sacrifice so much to achieve these goals do it for no other purpose than, it seems like, ego. Like, they just want to be the best in the world for nothing other than maybe fame, notoriety, and a paycheck. Mm-hmm. And then you have someone like Fiona who does these incredible feats of human endurance and speed for a very altruistic reason. She wants people to take notice so she can talk about veganism and compassionate living. So doing Cowspiracy and What the Health, which are super intense, information-dense documentaries, they're educational, they're using kind of a narrative format to try and get people engaged in the subject, but it's wall-to-wall sound bites. I really wanted to do something more artistic, something a little bit more intimate and gentle, and then to be able to do that into a sports documentary, it worked great. So when we were getting close to finishing What the Health, I contacted Fiona and said, "Hey, I'm going to be doing another film. Would you be interested in doing a film about you?" And she, her partner Martin, got the email and told her that, and she thought it was a joke. So, which is the perfect person that you'd want to do a documentary about. You don't want somebody would ask you to do a documentary about him. And then the film, visually very different. It's a heavy focus on cinematography versus, again, the information, and a lot more intimate.
Yeah, it's a beautiful film. I think the way that it unfolds, like the way you shot it, was just so beautiful. So I kind of want to get
Thanks.
into a little bit of that stylistic inspiration. What brought you to kind of your decisions for the look of the film, and like whether it's other films that inspired you or just kind of what your thought process was going into it.
Yeah. So I I love narrative films. I love the cinematography of scripted films because you have so much control, right? You're controlling every aspect of the environment, the light, the camera movement, the characters in the scene. And I'd love for more of that beauty of cinematography to be in the documentary world, but obviously you're limited on what you can control when you're a documentary shooter. But using those same tools. And so What the Health and Cowspiracy, trying to get there, but again, it's a really run and gun sort of documentary. And then you have a sports documentary, which is really, truly run and gun. I decided that I was going to shoot it all with anamorphic lenses. And anamorphic lenses, for those who aren't aware of it, when they see the black bars on the top and bottom of a movie, gives that ultra widescreen effect. That's usually shot with an anamorphic lens, which is squeezes the image down or allows you to de-squeeze the image to get that super ultra wide. And they're cool, beautiful lenses, and they lend this like really cinematic look that most people wouldn't identify until they start recognizing anamorphic, and they go, oh, right on, like that's anamorphic. And I love that look. But then to shoot a documentary and then a sports documentary on top of that as a solo shooter was, a whole other challenge. But I'm happy with the way it turned out because it, again, lends itself to be just a little bit more unique. It's separated a little bit from maybe other sports documentaries.
What did your crew look like, and what did the production for this film look like? How many times did you go out and interview her? And you went out to the desert and shot this incredible race in the desert that just looked so grueling.
Yeah, so the production was, I was director, producer, writer, and co-editor and director of photography on the film. I started in January, did a trip to England where Fiona lives, hooked up with my friend Ali Tabrizi, who's an unbelievably talented young filmmaker from the UK. He's the director of the upcoming film Seaspiracy, which is kind of a take on Cowspiracy. And hired him to work with me as a cinematographer for a week, and we shot for about 8 days with Fiona, pretty intensely. Her at her sanctuary, lots of long interviews. We would do 4-hour-long master interviews, and we've got probably 7 of those in the film because there's so much to Fiona's story that didn't make it into the film. And I wanted the film to start. I knew that we were going to go to the Sahara to film Fiona running Marathon of Sable, which is a 256-kilometer race through the Sahara Desert, self-sufficient. She has to carry all of her own food, water, everything she needs over the course of the race, sleeping bag, everything. And I knew it was going to be this really, bright, the yellow and orange sand, and it's just going to be this huge contrast to England. So I really wanted to make sure that showed up. So that's the choice of filming in January in British winter. It's dark and dreary. So the film starts with that, gray and blue and just so cold and dreary, so that it would contrast that much harder with the Sahara. Then the Sahara, I met up with Fiona about 3 months later in Morocco at the start of the race. And it was just me. It was myself. I had 2 cameras, camera on a gimbal and a camera on a tripod. No sound person, no producer, no one else. I was very fortunate to team up with a really talented driver, local driver, who drove a 4-wheel drive truck for me. And during this race, only about half of the course was accessible by vehicle. So we would drive along. I get dropped off, I get the shot, he'd come pick me back up, and then the other half, we would be going along and say, hey, you see that mountain over there? Go over it, go across the valley, and then that'll be the race course, because the race runs along, not in a straight line, but it doesn't double back on itself. And so I would literally take my gear, climb over actual mountain ranges, climb down to get a shot, and then climb back over to get back to the vehicle because parts of the course, just weren't accessible. And shooting totally solo, trying to get coverage for this race was definitely anxiety-inducing. but I really enjoyed it because I love the desert and I love the challenge of it. And not having to manage a crew made it actually really easy because I knew that if I wasn't getting the shot that I wanted, then it just wasn't happening. Where when you're depending upon other crew, you're questioning, did they get it? Did they get what I want? Are they sharing my same vision? And sometimes that's perfect and you get better than we could have hoped for. But I'm so used to shooting solo and running sound that it worked really well.
Yeah, I always think there's something kind of like appealing to me about being the solo shooter. I can totally relate with you. Like when you're just out there and you're responsible for everything, it's anxiety inducing, but a little bit less than whenever I have to rely on a bunch of other people.
Yeah,
but I don't know,
definitely.
maybe that comes from the BMX skateboarding background.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely when you work with people that you trust and you feel confident with their skills and ability, it makes it that much easier, and you just go right on, this is going to be great. The main reason why I shot solo was that it was cost prohibitive to anyone else to come with me to the Sahara. It was extremely expensive to shoot the race, and then being remote and all the costs of just getting people there out to the middle of the Sahara in Morocco was a challenge. So if I'd had a budget that allowed for it, I probably would have brought someone else with me. But again, I had a good time.
Me and the other co-host of this podcast, we really look at documentary films as cinema, and so talking about like shooting it in anamorphic and like all of the stuff you did with this film and just like trying to make it look as beautiful and like almost like a narrative as possible. What do you, because part of what I want to do is like inspire people, to like make documentary films and to watch them like their films. So like, what do you suggest people do to like learn more about how to make their films look beautiful? Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think watching a lot of films is one of the best things anybody can do who wants to be a filmmaker and wants to like step up their game, is look at films and dissect them. Look at why you like it. What is it about the color? What is it about the camera movement? What is it about the framing? Anything about it that draws you in, and watch films. If you're coming from a cinematographer standpoint or director of photography, watch films with the sound off, and you can see camera movements because you're not drawn into the story in the same sort of way, and you can see how things are framed in a different way. And then emulate, figure out how they got that shot, and then try and do that in a documentary, realm. I think is probably one of the best things you can do. But, knowing your tools, there's a lot of really passionate documentary filmmakers out there who are activists at heart. Like they want to get across a message, and they feel like, I'll just get a camera and I'll just start shooting. But you end up with, subpar documentaries. Like, take the time to learn it as an art form. You have this responsibility. If you're asking for someone's attention for an hour plus of their time, make sure that it's worthwhile to them. And you might have a phenomenal story, and you could shoot it on an iPhone and people would watch it and get a lot out of it. But imagine how many more people and how more accessible it can be if it's shot, at the highest quality you can possibly manage. And that's kind of my motivation. I look at like animal rights documentaries, and there's some phenomenal ones out there, but they were, shot grainy and they're shaky and they're just, they're poorly done because of they're not filmmakers, the people who are doing the videos or investigations. And then you look at, organizations like Animal Equality who said, no, let's step it up and let's use better gear. Let's make sure that we, get the highest quality we can. And I think they, help change the face of what an animal rights investigation has done, and to use that same sort of idea with whatever subject you care about. Just how can you make it as appealing as possible?
Absolutely. I think that's one of my favorite things about this most recent film of yours too, is just that you totally take that idea of making something that is very much about something you believe in, and it's very much something that, you know, Fiona believes in, like the subject of the film, you know, or the human, like that the film is about. And I just think that that's such an important way to go about it, is like, because if you make a really beautiful film, you can really like capture someone's humanity, and if you can relate that humanity and that narrative to a bigger message, I just think that that's like the most powerful thing that you can do. And I think that's what's so beautiful about like watching this film, is just that I think you really captured that. Like, you captured this really interesting human being who is like doing all this stuff that, as you said, is like usually for like the glory, you know, of the win or whatever. And she's even reluctant to call herself a runner, you know?
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Yeah, you know, what you're saying actually also reminded me too, is that making films out, because, you know, I'm vegan and I, you know, feel strongly about animal liberation issues and human liberation issues. But it's also making the film not for my community. You know, if you're making a documentary and you're trying to get across some sort of message, make sure that you're making it for people outside of your community and outside of who would be necessarily interested in it. And so, yeah, using whatever tools you can, like, hey, make it as visually appealing as you possibly can. So try and reach people outside of your immediate community, or whatever tricks you can, you know, make it funny, make it, you know, whatever you can, controversial, to get people. Because if you're just preaching to the choir, that's cool and all, like, you know, inspiring the choir is all right. But I think with activist-related issues or, you know, progressive topics in general, we're trying to reach people not just who already agree with us.
Yeah, and I almost think in the age of like YouTube videos and stuff, it's like, you know, when we have such, I mean, you can really go out and buy, I don't know, like a Blackmagic Pocket 4K camera now for $1,200 and shoot like a gorgeous movie that I would have, like, you know, you would have had to spend like 10 grand and then get film processed to make something that looks like half as good like 10 years ago.
That's it.
And so, like, I think in the age of like YouTube, like making documentaries as films first and separating it from kind of the mass of content that we get like on a daily basis, and actually like making a film, I think that that's just incredibly important these days.
Right, I totally agree.
But yeah, I kind of want to get into, in a relatively short amount of time, you've been able to put out 3 feature films. You've gotten your films on like Netflix. You've gotten, you know, James Cromwell to executive produce like this last film. Like, what would you tell filmmakers who are out there like making their first documentaries? Like, what's some advice or inspiration you can give them to like get out there and like finish their films and, you know, get it out to get people to watch?
Yeah, I think the best thing, and someone gave me this advice when I started out, was to shoot short films. You know, a lot of people want to start with, they've got this idea for a film and they want to jump into a feature-length narrative. But, you know, hone your skills and your storytelling abilities in a 3-minute documentary. Like, shoot a 3-minute mini doc. And when you feel really confident you can tell a story in 3 minutes, try a 5-minute, and then try a 15-minute, and then try a 45-minute before you go into the big, you know, 60-minute plus range, because you'll save yourself so many headaches. You'll save so much money. You'll learn so much better to make all the mistakes on a 3-minute film than on a 90-minute film. That would be the biggest thing, is that, yeah, just save yourself the headaches, because you get into a feature-length documentary and you go, oh my God, I can't believe I did that this way. Or over the course of a year or 2 years of shooting, you'll progress so much, and so you'll be able to look at your footage that you shot at the very beginning. It's your learning curve, and you can see that learning curve in the film. And maybe that's what you want stylistically, but if you're aspiring to try and have get the biggest impact possible, I would, say that start small and build up. And then I've just been incredibly fortunate. I'd like to give myself credit that, I'm talented and I've got some talent and I've got, I think, some good ideas, but I've just been incredibly fortunate with time and place that these films have resonated with people, that a film like Cowspiracy wouldn't have gotten the traction it got, even just if they come out 3 or 4 years earlier than it did. And then the having the ability of the vegan community getting behind our films, Cowspiracy and What the House are both, these vegan documentaries, really helped. And those films wouldn't be as successful, wouldn't have been on Netflix if it wasn't for the vegan community promoting them and pushing them, and making those connections with people like DiCaprio and Joaquin Phoenix and James Cromwell, which lended their names to the documentaries to, again, reach even further. So time and place, and utilizing your community, not exploiting your community, but getting support from the community is a big way of getting your films out there.
I'm curious how the reception for Running for Good has been. You've been doing screenings. It's streaming online now. People can go watch it. How's that been? How's that process been?
It's been really different from my 2 previous films. Netflix didn't pick it up or hasn't picked the film up yet. Netflix is in this whole restructuring process right now where they want 80% of their content to be original. So Netflix produced. And before, Netflix used to buy films and just basically slap their name on it. They maybe make a few changes, but for the most part, they're buying finished films. But now Netflix is actually producing, actively involved in writing, has their own studios. And so they really want their hands on a project. So it's much more difficult now to get your films on Netflix. You basically have to do them initially. And so it's gone back to more of a self-distribution. So the film's up on iTunes and Google and Amazon Prime and Vimeo On Demand, and a handful of other places that people can see it, and do theatrical screens through Tug, and then self-distributing DVDs, which has been great because you have complete control over your film and where it is and where it's shown. The downside is that people are looking towards the main platforms like Netflix to watch their films, and so it's this interesting place where the film industry has become so much more democratized because, as you mentioned before, camera equipment has become more affordable. There are these platforms where you can self-distribute, and that shifted things. And you had streaming services like Netflix that have changed the game for sure. But now we're going back to, it looks like this, a little bit more studio controlled, and I think how Netflix is restructured. And I think we're going to see things shift again really quickly, where it'll either go back to that and we will not see media produced in the same sort of ways, or it's going to totally flip and everything will just end up being for free. And it will be, sponsored content, for lack of a better term, with films being supported by corporations that are funding, the investment. Because I'm an activist filmmaker, I want my films to have the widest reach possible. And, if I can make back the money I invested in them, that's awesome because that allows me to make more films. But the reality is it's about getting the message out. That's really at any cost.
Absolutely. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on before we head out?
No, just thanks so much for thinking of me. I really appreciate the opportunity. I'm stoked to see more great documentaries, and I think films have the ability, as we know, to change the world, to change people's perspective on the world. So anything that promotes documentaries and gets people excited about documentaries, I'm stoked about. So I'm excited to listen to the podcast.
Thanks. Where can people find you, and where can people watch the film? We already kind of covered that, but just in case, make sure they go see it.
Right on. Thanks, man. Running for Good, you can see at runningforgoodfilm.com. Just Google also Running for Good, or Fiona Oakes, Tower Hill Stables, and and it will pop up. But you can find it on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Prime. If you're a Prime member, you can watch it for free, and on our website, Running for Good Film. And then you can find me at First Spark Media on social media. I'm pretty bad at it, so I'm mostly just on Instagram. But Running for Good Film, or Running for Good _film at Facebook and Instagram and all that is a great way to keep up to date with what's going on with that film.
Great. Thanks again so much for doing this.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks again, man, for thinking of me.
All right.
Cool.
So that does it for that interview. Hope you enjoyed my talk with Keegan, and
We'll see you in a couple weeks.
yeah. And so check us out on Instagram at A Documentary Podcast.
And also our website, adocumentarypodcast.com.
And you can follow me on Instagram at Joshua LeBure.
And me at CMS Moments.
And the music is by Timothy DeCans. And we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
Oh, and if you have any films that you want us to talk about, email adocumentarypodcast@gmail.com.
We need suggestions. Okay.
All right.
Cool. Yeah. Let me turn my camera off real quick and then return it on. Hopefully it works.